In 1977, at the tail end of the boldest decade American independent cinema had ever seen, a film quietly emerged that looked and felt unlike anything else in its world. Its name was Babyface. It arrived not as a loud spectacle or commercial hit, but as a strange, hypnotic, and meticulously constructed vision from one of the era's most fascinating filmmakers, Alex de Renzi. De Renzi was no stranger to boundary-pushing cinema. Before turning to narrative filmmaking, he had spent years as a documentarian in San Francisco, capturing the changing faces of American culture in the late 1960s, the protests, the music, and the people who lived between convention and freedom. That documentarian's eye, trained on observation rather than manipulation, became the foundation for his cinematic voice. When Babyface was released, audiences expecting another formulaic piece of the so-called porno chic era were surprised. What they got instead was an art film in disguise, morally ambiguous, visually poetic, and deeply rooted in the psychology of power and human behavior. The story, stripped of its sensational framing, was simple. A drifter's journey through guilt, transformation, and a reversal of traditional power roles. But beneath that simplicity lay something rare for the genre, a filmmaker treating his material as social study rather than fantasy. De Renzi shot much of Babyface on location around the Bay Area, including portions in Marin County, San Francisco docks, and small rented interiors that he and his crew transformed into believable environments. He preferred authenticity to polish. The creaking floors, dim natural light, and overcast skies of Northern California gave the film a muted realism, closer to John Cassavetes than Hollywood glamour. This approach reflected de Renzi's philosophy, that even in the most stylized of stories, truth could be found in the details, the awkward silence between two people, the texture of a worn-out chair, the glint of sunlight through a foggy window. Technically, Babyface was ambitious. Shot on 35mm film, it used long takes and natural light, with a minimal crew that often doubled up roles. De Renzi worked closely with cinematographers who shared his instinct for verite-style shooting, keeping the camera fluid, almost invisible, allowing moments to unfold organically. The film's production was largely self-financed, a hallmark of de Renzi's independence. By 1977, he was running his own small production unit out of the Bay Area, far from the corporate structure of Los Angeles studios. This distance allowed him to experiment freely with tone and rhythm, moving from dark psychological tension to quiet humor without apology. De Renzi's work often blurred the line between sociology and storytelling. Babyface was no exception. Behind the surface narrative, the film explored deeper questions about identity, guilt, and the shifting power between men and women in the post-Vietnam, post-Watergate America. To modern viewers, it's easy to forget how radical this was. In the late 1970s, gender politics were in flux, and cinema, even underground cinema, rarely questioned the roles assigned to its characters. De Renzi flipped that entirely. Within Babyface, the traditional dynamics were reversed. Power shifted hands, and in doing so, he created something that critics later called the most subversive American adult film ever made. The cast was composed of de Renzi's trusted circle of performers, many of whom had appeared in his previous projects. Among them were Amber Hunt, Linda Wong, and Desiree West, each bringing a distinct presence that grounded the film's shifting moods. De Renzi often cast performers not for notoriety, but for what he called human expressiveness. He once said, "I don't hire actors to play types. I hire them to play themselves inside my story." Filming schedules were tight, sometimes as short as 2 weeks, but meticulously planned. De Renzi's crew often worked guerrilla style, shooting early mornings on location without permits, using available light, and dubbing sound later in post-production. This gave Babyface its raw, immediate atmosphere. In editing, de Renzi's experience as a documentarian again came to the forefront. He built scenes through rhythm and reaction, rather than script adherence. It was common for him to shoot several improvised takes, then piece together emotional continuity in the cutting room. That's part of why Babyface feels simultaneously disjointed and hypnotic, as though it's unfolding in real time, not as performance, but as observation. Music, too, played a subtle yet vital role. Rather than a grand score, the film uses minimal, moody instrumentation, sometimes nothing more than faint organ chords or jazz-inflected bass lines. These sparse soundscapes heighten the film's atmosphere of uncertainty, giving it a texture reminiscent of European art cinema. By the time Babyface was completed, the cultural landscape was already changing. The porno-chic years were waning. Theatrical adult films that had once played alongside mainstream pictures were disappearing. Home video technology was on the horizon, and the independent theatrical scene was collapsing under censorship pressures and changing audience habits. Despite this, Babyface found an audience, not in multiplexes or big city premieres, but through quiet circulation among collectors, archivists, and serious cinephiles who recognized its craft. For decades, the film existed mostly in heavily edited VHS versions, which trimmed or altered key sequences to meet various regional standards. This patchwork availability added to its mystique. Film historians who caught glimpses of early prints often described Babyface as a lost work of underground cinema, a strange cousin to Taxi Driver or Last Tango in Paris, films that also wrestled with morality and alienation. Then, decades later, came a revival. Vinegar Syndrome, known for restoring forgotten independent and exploitation films, located and restored Babyface from its original 35mm negatives. For the first time since its debut, de Renzi's full vision could be seen. The pacing, the color balance, the long takes, all intact. The restoration revealed details long buried by poor quality transfers. The texture of the film grain, the nuance in performances, even the quiet background moments all became visible again. It was like rediscovering a painting after layers of dust had been removed. Critics revisiting Babyface through this restoration began to reevaluate its place in American film history. No longer viewed purely as a product of its genre, it was recognized as an experiment in power, realism, and subversion, a cinematic artifact that captured the uneasy atmosphere of 1970s America. De Renzi himself remained a prolific figure well into the early 1980s, adapting to new formats and technologies, but Babyface marked a creative peak, the moment when his documentary instincts, cinematic curiosity, and rebellious independence aligned perfectly. It's worth noting that de Renzi didn't see himself as an adult filmmaker in the way the industry later defined it. He saw himself as a storyteller who used every aspect of human life as raw material for film. He treated his sets as laboratories, his camera as a microscope. In his mind, cinema was a place to study behavior, to look closely at people when they were at their most unguarded. That's what makes Babyface endure. Beneath its controversial reputation lies a film about transformation, about loss, survival, and the uncomfortable truth that power and vulnerability are never far apart. Today, when we look back at de Renzi's work, we see a pioneer who refused to follow either Hollywood convention or underground dogma. He existed somewhere in between, an artist documenting the contradictions of his time. Modern filmmakers studying the period often cite Babyface as an example of what happens when independence meets integrity. It wasn't made to shock, and it wasn't made to please. It was made because Alex de Renzi, a restless observer of human nature, had something to say. And film was the only language bold enough to hold it. More than 40 years later, Babyface stands not as a relic, but as a reminder that art, even born in unlikely places, can transcend its origins. That a camera in the right hands, guided by curiosity and conviction, can turn even the most misunderstood genre into something resembling truth. And maybe that's why Babyface still captivates film historians and collectors today. Not because of what it shows, but because of how it was made. With a documentarian's patience, an artist's defiance, and a craftsman's eye for detail. It's a film born from the contradictions of its time: freedom and repression, glamour and grit, rebellion and remorse. But above all, it's a testament to Alex de Renzi's belief that cinema should never look away from human complexity. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you'd like to explore more restored and rediscovered films from the golden age of independent cinema, you can find links in the description, including restoration archives, posters, and Retrovidia's fine art gallery, where each story from this era continues to find new life. Until next time, keep watching closely, because sometimes the films history tried to forget are the ones that tell us the most about who we really are.